Hi, and welcome to the January Market Report here by FreightPlus. My name is Kyle McNaught. I'm going to kind of be the moderator for this conversation. And to start off, I want to go around the horn and kind of have everyone introduce themselves. So, Justin, why don't you start off?
Hi, Justin Merch, account manager here at FreightPlus. I oversee a portfolio of clients and look forward to having a good discussion.
Chris, you're up next.
Hi, Chris Gula, LTL manager here at FreightPlus. Interesting mode right now. A lot to talk about, so glad to be on.
Can't wait. Jess, go ahead.
My name is Jess Apostle. I'm the Director of Client Management here at FreightPlus, responsible for the account management team, the planning team, and the support team.
All right, Joe, you're up.
Name's Joe Hester. I am a load planner over here at FreightPlus. Really looking forward to joining this group for the market report this January.
Dan?
Dan Burke, Senior Manager of Carrier Operations. I'm focused largely on truckload and intermodal.
And finally, Connor.
Hey, I'm Connor Kerwin. I'm in Carrier Operations, and I focus on day-to-day freight broking initiatives and sourcing carriers for our clients.
Fantastic. All right, everyone. It's been a very interesting month in freight. As we all know, the regular winter kind of came. It's caused a lot of havoc in the systems. Jess, why don't you talk a little bit about what kind of you're hearing from clients, and we can kind of go into what we're seeing kind of just in the industry in general.
Yeah, so what we are hearing and seeing in general, like high perspective that's impacting all customers was, what happened after the holiday. And as y'all know, after the holiday, there was a big surge in COVID. So there's a lot of people just sitting on the bench. And we try to let customers know in a timely fashion, hey, we're seeing just a lot of drivers are out at this time. And then also, Dan will probably talk about it a little bit more later, but after the holiday, after the new year, a lot of times drivers might take a little bit of time off, or they're not where they're normally domiciled, and capacity was tighter as a result. So we're starting to see that bounce back towards the end of January. People are getting back to their home bases and starting to pick up their routines. But that I would say were the big two elements. And then lastly is, as y'all probably have heard, Canada has just imposed starting this past week that drivers have to be vaccinated if you're going to go into Canada. And as we know that there's a population of drivers who are pretty adamant about not getting the vaccine. So as a result, that's reduced the pool of eligible carriers who are able to bring product into Canada, which has also caused some increased congestion to that end. So those are I would say the big three things. It's the COVID, it's just bouncing back from holidays, which we normally see, but I think it was a little bit bigger this year. And then the Canada and post-vaccination status on drivers.
So, Jess, you brought up the COVID impact and coming off the holidays. I heard a good stat the other day. We've all been dealing with this now for 2 years, right? But the impact, at least on the LTL side, one carrier said that originally, it was upwards to 10% of their total workforce. And even though it's more widespread, the quicker turnaround, it's down to, the stat he said was about 1% of the workforce. So less impact, but certainly more overall frequency, if that makes sense. But with the reduced guidelines and people being able to return to quit work sooner, overall, just a less of an impact there. So.
And Chris, to put that into perspective, I mean, we had that internal roundtable with leadership last week, and we were starting to really put some numbers down. And I apologize because I don't remember it specifically, but I do know that 80,000 population of drivers that the workforce is lacking at the moment is less than 1% of our total driver pool in the country. So if you take that 10% that you're talking about, that's a massive number, just to put that into perspective for people.
Yeah. Yep.
What about on the truckload side? And I know it was it's not just impacting truck drivers, right? COVID affects everyone. Dan, what are you hearing, especially when it comes to shippers and receivers? I mean, how are the warehouses kind of panning out? What was sort of, how did the month kind of perform for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think as the month started, we saw several instances of warehouses having a hard time with staffing, and that really impacted carriers' desire to go to specific warehouses. And it's all related to COVID. I mean, what was really useful, was the reduction from the 14-day, 10-day quarantine to 5 days. Like once people were able to return to work faster, that helped a lot. So while it may have just been, a week where a facility was dealing with a COVID outbreak, it really allowed us to get back to a more normal, shipping pattern. And obviously, like, you compound, weather that we saw towards the early part of the month, with COVID, with, vaccine mandates coming up in Canada, it just all points in unfortunately another rate hike market.
And
It's interesting.
honestly, oh,
Yep,
sorry,
go ahead.
Kyle. And I do,
No, go
I
ahead.
do want to say you'll see it in the market report, but it's obviously impacting that tender rejection index in a big way.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, just looking at the spot markets, we're up 13 cents in per mile truckload rates from last month, and it's 9.5% just since October. It's a gigantic jump. We're almost up 20 cents a mile from October. So it's almost, at what point can it get too high? So
I know it's interesting, everything you're kind of talking about, especially the kind of ability for carriers to be able to find warehouses that are struggling. I mean, talk a little bit more about that. How's that experience? I mean, especially given that some of this stuff is very short term, right? For 5 days, all of a sudden you got half your workforce out of a warehouse, but carriers are aware of that and they're like, hey, I don't want to wait for the lead time. How have you guys been managing that big issue?
I think that's a good one for Joe too, because he's in the thick of it. Connor's in the thick of it. Justin is. Like, what are you guys seeing?
I'll jump in here. So I think what we're seeing with two of our clients, one of our clients that ships out of Mansfield, Massachusetts, and another client that ships out of Nevada. Both of the warehouses are severely impacted by the staffing, and it being directly related back to COVID, just staffers being out. So what you're seeing is they're asking truckers, drivers to get there earlier. And which is directly relating to the detention that they're willing to pay. They want those trucks on site because they know it's going to be a long picking process of the product, but they want to, make sure the truck's there and ready to go. So they're willing to pay that detention. And then I know for one of our clients on the East Coast, the director of supply chain, he's taking off his shirt and tie and getting into, work clothes and working right alongside the warehouse workers to roll up his sleeves and work alongside his staff because they're so shorthanded. And then what is normally maybe 1.5 hour load time is now turning into a 2.5 3 hour load time to load these trucks just due to the shorthanded time, which if you look at that, eating into load time, an extra hour and a half, 2 hours, maybe even up to 3 hours, that's going to impact transit times. It's going to impact these trucks arriving at their destination on time, and then, detention time. So it's certainly being visible to us on both coasts and two different warehouse setups.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the best thing we've been doing is, asking these carriers for patience. It's not going to change, unfortunately. COVID just has such an impact on these warehouses. All these big groups of people working together. It's tough to deal with, but it goes both ways. This driver shortage, this warehouse shortage. Each side is kind of asking each other for patience, work through it together.
And to that point, if you want to talk about one positive thing that's come out of COVID, I think is, and I just got home last night from the SMC3 conference and talking with the carriers, and the biggest positive that's come out is communication and everybody seeing the need for transparency and everybody to kind of work together when in the past it didn't necessarily go that way, right? So the carriers need help, the shippers, the receivers need help, and finally those barriers are being broke down because of the pandemic, because of the driver shortage. Is it a true shortage, or is it inefficiencies that like Justin and Joe said, that drivers are tied up longer, so their availability is cut in half, cut by a third, whatever that may be. So we talk about a lot of the negatives in the supply chain right now, and what COVID is causing. But maybe the light at the end of the tunnel is that all parties are starting to see the need for increased communication and transparency.
Now, to take it back to a negative, because you went too optimistic on that, we're talking supply chain right now. The Canadian kind of vaccine mandate sort of has gone in effect. We've been reading in the news at the time of this recording, which is January 27th. A ton of truckers are on their way to Canada's capital, Ottawa, to kind of protest, and a lot has been made up. There's some reports out saying really it's a lot of nothing. It's a lot of steam for nothing, that everything's been moving forward. But then I heard yesterday of drivers saying that the detention time at the border is up to 3 hours. And like the amount of even as a vaccinated driver, it's taking forever to get across the border. Justin, I know you did a little bit of research. Do you want to kind of provide some context around what exactly is kind of the Canadian vaccine border kind of story a little bit for us?
Right. So each administration on either side of each country has imposed their own mandates of what needs to go into effect. So going into Canada, the Canadian government is really requiring all inbound drivers coming into their country to be fully vaccinated with one of the approved vaccines. Those are the major ones that we've heard of, Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, J&J. So they need to provide a paper copy of that at the time of entry at the port of entry. What the Canadian government is also trying to emphasize is for these drivers to upload their Canadian or their vaccine status to the Canadian government through ArriveCan app. But so they're hoping that would decrease the wait time. But we certainly, from the stats that we're reading online, and then just what our ears are to the pavement, is that there is still log jams at the port of entry on the wait times.
Hey, Justin, real quick, is that, not to interrupt you, is that fully vaccinated and boosted, or is it just for now fully vaccinated?
Good question.
Yeah, great question. Needs to be fully vaccinated. So, you need to have that paper copy on you going into Canada. Obviously, if you don't have that, you're certainly going to get rejected, and that's going to certainly impact the end consignee and that freight arriving on time. And then, again, if you didn't have it uploaded into their app, their portal, you got to show it one way or another. And then conversely, coming into the U.S. From the Canada side, it's really the same mandate our government administration has put forth: is you need to be fully vaccinated. That became into effect this past week in January 22nd. So we're about 5 days from that. I think there was a lot of people were hoping that would be delayed. At least a few weeks, if not a few months. But yeah, the Biden administration is certainly, sticking to their guns that, what they rolled out in November, let's say. I think what we need to go back and look at in November, the Biden administration forewarned the industry that, this would be coming. So there was many months of planning, but I think there was still a lot of parties involved thinking that this would be pushed out, or various court lawsuits would go through, and those simply didn't happen. So I think all in all, it has been a point of emphasis on each side of, how can we be more efficient in getting our products across the country line. And then, I think if we want to get into the numbers, I think there's some really interesting numbers out there that I've dug up through some really reliable industry sources. So, and some of these, really shocked me, and it kind of goes and emphasizes, the importance of trade between the two countries, and things, maybe we take for granted. And now we're kind of seeing it come to a not to a halt, but to a slower flow of commerce. Some of the stats that I saw that were pretty interesting and I think are worth noting for this group in our audience is 75% of the freight hauled between the countries is actually handled by Canadian drivers. So when you see all the protests that's happening across Canada, whether they're setting up blockades or marching protests or driving protests, there's lives, and there's lives essentially. Their income is on the line, to take care of themselves and the family. And so if you think about, try to drill down and put that into some even further numbers. The pool of drivers that I saw was quoted at like 160,000 that routinely go back and forth between Canada. So the low end, it's going to be impact about 12,000 drivers, and on the high end, 26,000 drivers that are going to be impacted by these vaccine mandates crossing the border into either country. So certainly very impactful.
So we couple it with less drivers, longer detention times, less staffing everywhere. Like, just think of the overall impact on moving product cross border.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but Canada is our #1 trade partner when it comes to, right.
Absolutely. And if I could just, I think this one other stat would put really things into context. So if we look at the outbound tender rejection from Canada, and if we were to go back 11, 12 months from where we are right now, that number was fluctuating between 2 and 3%. A full year later, January 22, we're up to 11%. So that's pretty sizable tender rejection on outbound Canada loads. So, as Jess kind of said, listed out some of the things that are being impacted. It's certainly a serious thing that each administration is working through, but then the trucking industry is working through.
Well, it's just another thing, we talk about all these issues, and the biggest impact it has on rates, right, and the prices, and this is just another one of those. So if you're a vaccinated driver, you're worth more right now, right? If you're crossing the border. So why wouldn't you, especially if you're a smaller independent, truckload carrier? Hey, I can do it. I can get the load across. They jack up your rate by $500, whatever that may look like, and then again, capacity and the people willing to do that shrinks, so you're going to pay more.
Now, actually, I'm sorry, but Joe had an interesting nugget about that piece in the drivers. I don't know if you want to share, Joe.
Yeah, so heard from an industry source, about 20 to 30% of the owner operator pool is just taking the winter off. Has more to do with the wear and tear on truck. But these owner ops, independent drivers, they just made, unfortunately, so much money in 2021. They're just going to take the winter off. You guys talked about last market report, but equipment shortages obviously play into it. They just want to take better care of their equipment and don't want to run into all these risks of sitting at a location for hours, sitting at a border for hours, getting stuck somewhere. So they've just entirely taken their trucks off the road.
And they hustled so much in the past quarter where they can afford to. For like the first time, really.
Well, and part of that too is that so many of our drivers are from overseas. They're from India, they're from Eastern Europe, and so they're taking that 2 to 3 months to go home and go see their families who, they send money to every week, but they don't necessarily get to see anything beyond pictures or a FaceTime. Like, to actually go spend the time with them is great. And yeah, to Joe's point, to not have to deal with, the 16 inches of snow that's supposed to be hitting Boston this weekend, like it's a dream right now.
Yeah, to preach. But
I like that. I like that idea. You guys think we can pitch that to our senior management? Maybe take the winter off
for equipment purposes. But so as industry professionals, I'd love to kind of know what you guys are. So how do you have the foresight? What are you looking at? How are you going to pay attention to this? What kind of KPIs are you putting in place to monitor the kind of Canadian border winter kind of area with the driver shortage?
Kyle, I think one of the most important things that we're doing in house, or what other customers, suppliers, clients can do, is really make sure that your carrier network is thoroughly vetted, making sure you understand their capacity. I know Dan and his team do a great job of communicating with their assets on their vaccination status. How is this mandate going to impact them? And then Dan's relaying that over to the client management team, so we can, assure our clients, that are moving freight into Canada or out of Canada, like, you're in good hands. We got this covered because we went through a vetting process, and making sure that we're aligned with good assets, good carriers, where, if 10% of their driver pool or 5% of their driver pool steps away, that there's still a significant pool of drivers in place that can haul the freight, and it doesn't come to a halt, or a really slow down trickle.
And so, to echo that sentiment, and Justin talked about it a little bit earlier, where like last year we had a 2% outbound Canada rejection index. First, now we're at 11. So last year, if you look back at this time, Canada was still very much shut down, and there wasn't much manufacturing going on. Now they're starting to get back going. And so, what we're hearing from carriers is they're going back to their customers that served them when there was no manufacturing, and saying, hey, we've got your back. We'll make sure that your contract freight gets out. But it's the spot business right now in and out of Canada that's really going to suffer. If you don't have a dedicated asset on that lane, there's a really good chance that it's just not going to move right now. You're going to be scrambling. There's capacity tightening. There's 10 to 15% expected to come off. Now, what we've heard is more like it's more pockets of Canada that are going to be impacted more than others. Like, a lot of the carriers that are in more of the metropolitan areas, like your Montreals, your Torontos, they've seen smaller percentages of their employees kind of walk away because they won't get the vaccine than in some of the more rural areas. And that matches what you're seeing in the US. Like, if you're in farm country, you are more likely to not want to be vaccinated than if you are in, Boston, New York, Chicago. Like, it just follows those trends.
I'm just thinking here on the operations side with this whole thing, and call me crazy, but Dan, do you possibly see a situation where you have one carrier hauling it from the United States, say Ohio, one of our clients ships out of Ohio quite a bit, and you go up and there's almost like a drop lot set up where there's a vaccinated driver or somebody offering that service to come across and whether they bobtail across, just across the border of the United States, they pick up that full load going into Canada, and since they're vaccinated, they haul it across.
Yeah,
I think that
the same.
I think that there's a lot of those partnerships that are probably going to start to happen. I mean, you look at kind of that's the future of our industry is those drop pools. Kind of the way that LTL carriers work together. Truckload carriers are going to need to partner that way to be successful long term. So yeah, I definitely see that to be the case. I think, just kind of knowing how our industry operates, it's going to probably take a little while for us to get there, but it's the future. It's not, that's definitely a realistic expectation.
Well, it's, I worked one of the LTL carriers I worked for in the past. We had it set up and we had a Canadian carrier that we worked with, and they would come down and to our Detroit facility, and they'd take the Canada loads back up. So, anything, being a Canadian citizen, getting back across was easier for them. It was just the way the relationship worked. And I could see this, something similar happened here where they're coming across, they're grabbing a full trailer and going back because they're Canadian citizens, they're vaccinated because they had to, or knew it was coming.
One interesting thing before we move on that I'm just a little something you brought up, Chris Gula, is the idea of, hey, I'm vaccinated, so I'm going to cost a little bit more. Have you guys heard any carriers kind of saying that? Has that been anything that's come out yet? I mean, I know we're 5 days in, right, from this kind of mandate going, but that's an interesting thing to me, especially if that's going to be kind of a new kind of add-on of just like, oh, I'm vaxxed, by the way, so can kind of go anywhere.
It's not directly stated, but we are seeing spot rates going in and out of Canada rise. So I mean, you know that if your carrier is taking that freight, then they're going to be vaccinated. Otherwise, you're going to end up with it back at the shipping dock. So yes and no.
Yeah, to your point, Kyle, it's literally a marketable attribute to be vaccinated, which is just kind of bananas when you think about it. And I think it's so great that we're able to have these conversations, because we obviously have our ear to the ground, and we are always listening to what the industry experts say. But like, I look at it as our experts as like Joe and Connor. They're talking to drivers. They're talking to each other. They have a stronger pulse on what's going on in the day to day than some of what we hear. It's great to hear like the growth stats, but I don't think there's a place. And Dan, Connor, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, Joe heard 20 to 30% of the owner operators might be on the bench for Q1 this year, just so they can kind of save their assets and keep things running smoothly. But none of that's listed anywhere. No one says like out of office for 3 months. Like, those numbers just start to show over time to tell the story, but you're hearing it first, right? And if certain drivers are on the bench, like, no one's advertising that. No one's saying, oh, 5% of our workforce is out this week because they're not feeling good and they had to quarantine. That's not advertised. You see it in the numbers over time, but you guys are hearing firsthand by talking to the people who are making it happen. I mean, you're making it happen. And so we're able to have these conversations, I think, in advance of really the numbers telling the story.
Yeah. In terms of like the vaccine as like an attribute, it's kind of like an unsaid thing. And like when I'm negotiating with these Canadian carriers, I think it might be more of a verbal bartering chip like later on, but it's still like the first week of this going on. So it's like known between me and dispatchers, like when we are negotiating. And the cool thing about, all these owner ops taking time off is our job is to find the owner operators that aren't taking time off. So I don't think our customers are really going to notice this big difference in all these people taking vacations, because we're going to have these massive portfolio of carriers who are working year round, or, some are taking time off. Doesn't matter. We already have another guy for it. So we're on top of it. And that's great about what we're doing.
Just to throw it out there, there is a carrier that owns one of the bridges into Canada. So I don't know if that will come into play, but or the family, I should say, owns it.
What bridge is it, Chris? I did not know that.
The Ambassador Bridge, and it's the Maroon family owns it. So.
Interesting.
Which is mortal enemies of yellow transportation, right?
Yes.
Well, before we kind of get into specific modes, I mean, it's all fascinating. Another kind of news item that I'm gonna kind of throw to the group that happened in January is the 18-year-old getting that ability to drive kind of intrastate, or not just being able to drive cross state borders. How, especially the carrier ops team, I'd love to kind of know what type of impact. I mean, we talk about how there's a driver shortage. We talk about like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, and the 18-year-olds only being able to drive kind of in their state was one of them. I know that it's a 3-week course. There's a bunch of kind of stipulations, so it's probably not something that you're expecting to see this month or even next month or probably Q1. But given kind of the history, how do you guys? What's your viewpoint on the kind of 18-year-olds being able to kind of add to the driver pool?
Personally, I think it's a great addition. I think really when we're going to start to see a huge impact is going to be June, when some of the high school kids who decide they don't want to go off to college and take on significant debt are going to say, I can go make a really nice salary starting out as a truck driver. I mean, it's a great way to get going.
And see the country, they're not tied down, right? I mean, one of the biggest complaints we hear about is family time. at 18, 19 years old, let's go hit the road, let's drive coast to coast. And, the the people that are trying to enact this and have really been behind it the whole time, they're saying, you can be in Chicago, Illinois, and be in Indiana within 30 miles, right? But yet, you can have a 18-year-old kid drive across the state of Texas, right? Which is legal now,
Right.
but they can't cross state lines. It just, it's kind of crazy if you look at it that way. And those that fear that an 18-year-old can't handle an 80,000 pound piece of equipment, well, they are already. I don't have the statistics of how many are driving, but if you're in a state like Texas, you could drive hundreds of miles and
Now,
still be legal to drive.
to play the devil's advocate side, there is that yes, you're driving in Texas for a long thing, but there's stuff like mountain driving and night driving that,
Yeah.
in theory, you're not someone from Texas really isn't interacting with. But now, if they're an 18-year-old that can drive, and I know that the new course, the CDL, doesn't require kind of a specialized course in mountain driving or any of that type of stuff. Is there any fear about that type of stuff, especially with things like the nuclear verdicts? I mean, we all know the Colorado case of kind of the snow and stuff like that. And we're like, hey, we're about to hit 18 inches tomorrow. Spoiler alert, we record from Boston. We're all freezing except for Chris, who's in St. Louis. But is there any worry about that type of stuff? Or how do you kind of, is there going to be a factor in rates? Is there anything like that you guys kind of anticipate? And I'm springing this on you, so it's completely fine that you got to think about it. Don't really have an answer right now.
I would
It's just
imagine it's too early to tell.
Right.
Like it hasn't
I
taken
think
off yet.
Yeah, and the carriers are going to have to look at their insurance policies too, right? I mean, they're already astronomical in what they have to pay. So what does this make that look like?
So
Is it even going to be worth
policy, Chris? You have teenage kids. What's an insurance policy on an 18-year-old driving a car, not a 53-foot trailer?
Yeah, I mean, and it's male
You know
versus
what
female.
It's a lot. I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
because they've only had their license. What is it? Can you get your license at 16, or is it your permit?
No,
Like,
you
when
can
do
drive
you-
in both states at 16.
Yeah.
You know.
Both
All right. So you've had 2 years of driving experience, and now you're driving, 80,000 pounds down the road with your rig and everything. So
Yeah.
it is a lot. I mean, it's great in theory, but it's a lot. And I can only imagine, Chris, I had not thought through the insurance piece. That's got to be massive.
Just take it a quarter mile at a time.
Nowadays it's weird because I hear my kids talk about it. Well, I'm going to pick up so and so. Kids don't necessarily get their driver's license, like we used to, or I did. I turned 16. I was at the DMV. I was going through the test. I was getting my license. Now kids might wait 6 months. It's not. So is there going to be that much of an interest, to Dan's point, if we see, when these kids start graduating, is there going to be that much of an interest? There's all the trades out there are hiring, right? So, I'd like to see stats as far as, becoming a carpenter, or electrician. Are they seeing more, 18, 19-year-olds going into those fields?
I mean, to add to your point,
a hot Instagram account of a young 18, 19-year-old trucker driving across, and
you're aging yourself, Jess. It's TikTok.
Yeah, I mean, that's gonna stay.
But to speak to your point, Gula, I mean, most kids, it is a trend right now where you've got Lyft, you've got Uber. Like, why do I need my license? I've got the freedom. I've got I can get out. I don't need to be reliant on a car that needs oil, that needs gas, that needs maintenance, that needs all this stuff. It is a trend that we've been seeing, that most kids, and we're calling them teens, but teenagers are having less and less driving. I think another point that you just brought up is really interesting. Is, I mean, let's say it's not the issue isn't just hiring, it's the retention of drivers. And you're talking about Gen Zers who very much are aware of what their personal rights are and what they're going to accept. Are they really going to be fine with sitting for 3 hours and can't go to the bathroom? Like, you're talking about a generation that is just fundamentally shifting how their work kind of attitude is. Like, it's going to be an interesting thing. As much as everyone's like, oh, it's great, we finally let an 18-year-old drive across states lines, it's still the industry has an issue. I mean, we had a whole discussion last week about some of the macro issues and that big thing of how drivers are treated, how they're paid, how this all works out. It's not, you can give the greatest bonus in the world, but at the same time, are you being able to retain your drivers is the biggest question.
Yeah, and I'll go back to, what I heard a lot of at the SMC3 conference, that collaboration, that transparency for all parties to do better, and that's, the positive, like I said, coming out of this whole thing is shippers, receivers, carriers, we all need to be in this together to make, to fix the supply chain. You can point at all the issues we talk about every month, the driver shortages, the inefficiencies, the equipment issues, all that. Even if you take all those things off the table and you have plenty of drivers, plenty of equipment, you still have issues of detention time and just overall treatment of drivers. They're still present, so they're not going to go away unless they're addressed and everybody comes together and works on the solutions together.
You're just kind of pissing off more people. Like,
yeah.
You're like, oh,
I feel like I feel like I'm Mr. Positive on this call today, but I just want everybody to hug and work it out. So let's make all these problems go away and make everybody's life easier, man.
All right. Is there anything else? Otherwise, I think we can kind of start jumping a little bit into just how certain modes performed in the month. I know, Dan, you've got something on the tip of your tongue right now.
Real quick, you had asked about, mountain driving and like learning those different skills within driving. So a lot of times when carriers come out of driving school or drivers come out of driving school, where they go is like your Knight Swifts, your JB Hunts, your Schneiders, or some of the larger LTL carriers. And Chris can speak more to the LTL, but in the truckload side, typically you're partnered with a training driver for the first 6 months, and you're basically running as a team. And so you're learning all of the skills from your trainer on how, that's not, if you're in Oklahoma, it's really hard to learn how to drive in a mountain. Super flat. You've got to go out over the road to do that. So that those skills are picked up on, and not to say you're going to master it within those 6 months, but you're going to start to have a better feel for it. And that's something that comes over time.
I mean, I understand, but at the same point, it's if you're a 21-year-old who's been driving, at least you got at the best, was it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years under your belt of driving, as opposed to 2 years max of driving. It's like, oh, okay, a mountain that Oklahoma, I've never really seen this before. I could see it's a whole long conversation. We could definitely do it at a later date. But yeah, let's jump into modes. I think, as we all know, everything starts at the ports. So Connor, hit us up. What happened in the ocean modes and kind of what did you see? I know a ton of interesting stories, especially just in terms of maybe a little relief I read about, especially in the West Coast ports. However, East Coast is getting worse.
Yeah.
That in at the end there.
It's kind of the same story. LA Long Beach congested as always. I think the count was like 54 dwelling ships on Tuesday, or what I read. I'm not quite sure. I know for getting rid of empty containers, LA and Long Beach, they're working with these shipping lines to, try to incentivize them. I guess loading more than discharging in a way, trying to get rid of those. I think the count's like 120,000 empty containers in LA and Long Beach, so it's quite a bit. But yeah, same story. Other news for, I guess, driving at night over there, getting containers out of there. They're trying to incentivize the nighttime drivers as well. On top of that, I believe there was a Teamsters meeting for drivers in LA and Long Beach. I think they're trying to unionize, so that pretty much sums it up for over there. But yeah, congestion as always. So
any news on the relief? I know I was reading it's saying that thanks to stuff like a kind of a shift back to consumer spending and stuff like that, there's a possibility of some relief, but not until late in 2022. And that's only if everything kind of stays as is.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to say everything's going to stay as is, with how things have been going. So I try not to look into like the predictions. They're, a year out. It's hard to say.
All right. What about truckload, Dan? What's happening? Kind of how did the month perform in January for truckload?
Yeah, I think the biggest telling thing is as always, spot rates are up. It's another 13-cent climb. 27 cents a mile since October, 9.5%. Like it's going to continue to go up. Fuel was relatively flat within the month, so that didn't necessarily, cause those rates to go up. Volume continued to rise, and as we talked about earlier, capacity started to fall off with Omicron and with some of those other things. So, rejection rates still remain relatively flat, but we're all kind of a crazy month.
Absolutely. LTL, what do we see, Chris?
The carriers are still have, control. It's going to be a bullish market. I heard that at the conference this week. You're going to see GRIs will probably, I saw the biggest one of my career released yesterday by Saya throughout a 7.5% general rate increase. Everybody else fell in, from the standard 4.9 to 6.9 range. But we did see 2 GRIs in 2021. You'll probably see 2 in 2022. You'll see carriers continue to adjust their accessorials. You'll see carriers, embargo those shippers, receivers that we've talked about, mainly on the receiving end that we've been referring to on this call. These big distribution centers that are just tying up their equipment, tying up their people. So the carrier, there's enough freight out there, right? And their rates have gone up, so they're making more money. They can even handle less freight and still increase their revenue year over year. So they're going to be picky on the new freight they bring on. They're going to look at their yield quite a bit and see how much, what accounts are operating, in the hundreds, and either go for a huge increase or just scrub that business. So the carriers have a lot of control and a lot of power right now, and the good ones are going to take advantage of that and clear out the lower accounts, clear them out to make capacity for the accounts that, hey, they make money on, right? That pay their invoices timely, that don't go into these DCs that tie up the equipment and the drivers. So if you're a shipper out there, you're a receiver out there, you start paying attention, because your list of carriers available to you is going to shrink unless you start cleaning up some of your behaviors. You want to be that shipper choice. You want to be desirable to the carriers right now. If you're not desirable, you're either going to pay through the roof or you're not going to have any options. And I know at FreightPlus we take a lot of pride in communicating that, and Jess and her team communicate, hey, we need to work on this, we need to work on that. Because as we talk to carriers, we get that feedback, and then we go to our clients and say, hey, let's work on this, let's work on that. We're having issues here or there. So again, going back to the transparency, and just what you're seeing in the LTL environment is they're gonna make hay right now, so to speak, and they're going to put their networks in position to be very, very profitable in 2022.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. It's not a fair playing field either. The high volume shippers don't really, because they have enough volume that they won't have to really step it up and really focus on it, where kind of the mid-sized businesses really do have to get their act in gear, become very transparent, and make sure that their processes are as efficient and for LTL or all modes as possible.
They have to know they have to know their supply chain. That's the biggest thing, is educating them. They don't, a lot of them don't understand it. So to make improvements in it, you have to understand it first. And I think that's where, companies like FreightPlus come into play and say, listen, this is what happens. You don't just create a bill of lading and it magically goes from A to B and it gets there and everything's all good. And it doesn't happen like that. There's a lot of things, especially in the LTL mode, that goes on behind the scenes and during the life cycle of a shipment. And these companies, these shippers need to understand that and know that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Jess, you're going to say.
No, I was literally saying the same thing, Chris. Insert shameless plug here. I mean, that's kind of our job, is to be the extension of our customers' transportation arm, right? Providing the tech and the team and the sourcing and the strategy. But where I see is it's the mid-sized companies that are getting beaten up. Imagine being a small company. You're dealing with all these cost increases. You don't have a team that's able to source trucks, the right way. You might not be able to pick your product until the truck is backed up at your door. Like everything is just harder. And I feel so bad for those companies at this time, because the competitiveness is just through the roof. So, not to end on a sour note, Chris, can you throw in some more happy hug advice so we can end on a high note here?
I'm all out. I don't know. We got down the road now. I'm done.
Okay.
I'm done. I'm tapped.
All right.
Well, Justin bought a snowblower. Maybe
Yeah.
that makes everyone happy.
I'm pumped to use it this weekend. So Kyle, one thing that Kyle, I don't know if you were going to go down the intermodal path, but one thing that I was thinking about as I was looking into the whole vaccine mandates is, how is intermodal going to benefit from this? If you are if your manufacturing production is nimble enough where you can allow your freight to be moved intermodal, and you're willing to let that move at a slower pace, that's you could probably get better rates, and you're not going to be faced with your truck potentially getting rejected at the border because the driver isn't fully vaccinated. You know, into Canada, intra Canada. I think that there's certainly options there, and that's certainly something I would advise, our clients, if they were ever in that position in the next month or two. If you can ship intermodal to Canada or into the U.S. from Canada, it's certainly a valid option that should be worth being discovered.
Absolutely. And like I said, we'll kind of wrap up here. So thanks everyone for your time today. But yeah, our market report's going to be out on the Freight Plus website, freightplus.io. So go there, check it out. You can see this kind of full video that you're already kind of either listening to or watching. But you can also read the report, see the real stats of everything. But yeah, for everyone involved in this call, thanks so much and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And that's our show. Go now to freightplus.io to download the market report. In the meantime, subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching Consulting Logistics. I'm Comic Knot. Rock and roll.